An adult human has 206 bones. And what if I told you those bones are actually more important for you than your muscles, right? And your tendons and your ligaments and whatever else you have in your body. What if I told you they're the reason you are able to actually have your body, literally, right? And in this video, we're basically gonna go into a deep dive of how you can actually strengthen your bones, increase bone density, right? And just overall, just use that to be a better martial artist. So, you know, we're going to be talking about this thing called Wolf's Law, which is basically it's regarded as a scientific theory, but I think nowadays, honestly, we could kind of consider it a fact. And that is that it basically describes the relationship between bone tissue and mechanical stress, or like loads, that are placed upon the bones, and that the bone tissue will actually adapt and remodel itself in response to these stress. This is like when you put your bones through them, right? And this Wolf's Law has been supported by numerous studies and observation, and this is widely considered to be an important concept in the understanding of bone health and development, right? So basically, how this theory kind of got developed is by this one guy. His name was Julius Wolff, right? In the late 19th century, right? And what he basically kind of stated is that in this law is that bones in a healthy person or even animal really will adapt to loads placed upon it. So your bones will basically become stronger and denser in response to the stresses and strains placed on it, right? And in the opposite is also true, right? Bones that are not subject to any load will actually become weaker and become less dense over time. And we actually see this with a lot of old people, right? Especially when I used to work in physical therapy. Right, a lot of these old people have these bone issues, right? And it's because let's face it, right? These boomers are not working out for the most part. Most old people just give up on life at one point, right? All they do is just sit, and it's all that sitting and being lazy and doing nothing. You're telling me that you wouldn't have bone issues? Of course you will, right? And this law is actually very important, right? And because, especially in the field of orthodontics and sports medicine specifically, explains how the bones can actually adapt to stress and physical activity, and why bones become weaker when subjected to prolonged, um, basically, like I said, laziness and just disuse, you're not even using your body properly. Right. So that's why it's actually very important to exercise, to physically train, right? Which hopefully I don't have to tell you that because you already do MMA, right? And you're hopefully lifting, right? This is a side point, but being stronger helps you become a better martial artist. Wow, who would have thought, right? I know the propaganda in Jiu-Jitsu is strength is this seen as this down, it's basically just seen as bad for whatever reason, right? If you use strength, you're like an evil person. But that can be further from the truth, right? Because consistent and progressive overload, right, with weights or honestly any type of exercise, right, can lead to increased bone density and strength, right? What's actually very interesting is that especially in the context of martial arts, and then I'll 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 explain with martial arts and other sports as well, so that you guys kind of have an understanding, and you can kind of take each thing from you know and see what can help you specifically, right? So in the context of let's say Muay Thai specifically, right? A lot of Muay Thai training, what do they do specifically? They perform repeated techniques that require the bones to become stronger, right? Such as kicks, right? Punching the bag. The bones will actually adapt, become stronger over time. This is why, Muay Thai fighters usually, they condition their shins by repeatedly kicking a hard object, whether that's heavy bags, pads, or even the banana trees, right? right? By subjecting their shins to consistent and progressive stress, the bones in their shins will adapt and become stronger, resulting in less pain and injury when kicking hard objects and, kicking another human being, right? Similarly, right, they'll also do this with other parts of their body, right? Knuckles, elbows, forearms, knees, right, other parts of the body through repeated impact with the heavy bag, pads, or other objects, right? And they've actually done studies on this, right, on Muay Thai fighters, right? There have been several studies on the bones, and there was one study that actually found that Muay Thai fighters had a higher bone density in the hips and in the spine, right? Which is actually very interesting because they're obviously not hitting the bag with their hip, like the hip isn't right, or the spine. Yet even that high impact affected their whole body, even to the hip and to the spine, and made it more bone dense, right? Right, and yeah, they basically had higher bone density because of that in other areas of the body because of Muay Thai training, right? It's very interesting, right? And then there was a more recent study actually in 2020 actually examined the bone density of you know even like Muay Thai fighters, and they found that they had higher bone density in the legs and spine as well, right? Than than the other group, which was like a non-athletic group of people. The study also found the bone density of a Muay Thai fighter was positively correlated with their years of training. So basically, the more they trained over the years, the stronger their bone density was. Overall, what's interesting about these Muay Thai training they clearly have a very positive effect, particularly in the hips, the spine, the legs, and of course it's going to be in other areas of the body as well. And obviously, I will tell you this as a precautionary, right? That bone maxing, right, is it's a gradual process. You cannot rush this stuff, right? You need proper technique first and foremost, right? Avoid injury. And the process of bone adaptation is a little bit, it's going to take you time. It's not going to happen within a day, right? So attempting to rush it, right, can actually be bad. So it can result in fractures or other injuries. So obviously be cautious of that, right? Right. And they've done, now if we look at karate, for example, Wolf's Law can actually be applied to, to a similar thing, strikes, blocks, and other techniques. By repeatedly practicing these movements with proper form and gradually increasing the intensity, karate practitioners can progressively load to their bones and stimulate bone growth and adaptation. Right, and there was actually a karateka who specifically trained his punching technique consistently over time, right? And they will actually experience bone atrophy, right? And increase in their hands and their wrists, and even in their forearms and wrist, right? And this can, by doing this, right, you will probably have seen those old videos of the karate people. It's like hitting, like, um, the Makiwara board, right, which is like a wooden board. So we're gonna get into that as well, right? And that will obviously help with the bone density in your hands, right? And there was actually a study, actually, believe it or not, on this as well, right? They took 18 karate practitioners, right, and 18 regular people, right? And the study found that karate practitioners had way more bone density in their hand bones compared to these regular humans, right? Another study also found that their lumbar spine, right, their lumbar spine, right, and their femur, right, which is basically just part of the leg, right, of the karate practitioners compared to these regular humans was actually higher in bone density, right? And the study also found that they had greater bone density than, again, these normal human beings. Overall, we can see that these studies, like, as we have seen with karate and Muay Thai, You know, bone density and bone maxing does truly help, right? Now we're going to be talking about, a bit more of a traditional martial art. I mean, I guess karate technically also, but this is a bit more ancient, I guess. And that is in the context of Wing Chun, right? Which is a Chinese martial art, right? That emphasizes speed, precision, and redirection, right? Wolf's Law can basically help explain how practitioners can develop these stronger bones in their hands and in their forearms, repeatedly practice striking drills, such as the wooden dummy, right? The wooden dummy is just like basically just a training tool in Wing Chun, right? You probably have seen right, Don Yen, and I think even Bruce Lee at some points has used this as well, right? And a lot of other Wing Chun people just in general use a wooden dummy, right? Obviously, wood being a hard object, right? And they practice on this, you know, repeatedly throughout their training. So obviously, you can imagine that their bone density would increase because of that, right? Right, especially when you're repeatedly doing these movements, it's going to increase your arm density, your leg density, right, and just overall the body's density, right? And what's very interesting, again, study was also published on this, and it examined the bone density of Shaolin Kung Fu practitioners compared to, again, average people. The researcher found that Shaolin Kung Fu group had significantly higher bone mineral density, right, in the femur, in the hip, and the lumbar spine, right? So yeah, like literally just striking overall, like will increase your bone density in other parts of your body, even if you're not going to strike with those body parts per se, like the hip, for example, right? Just by you kicking or you punching will literally make your spine and your hips stronger, right? As these studies have shown, right? And another study was also published in, you know, I believe in 2010, and specifically on the methods of bone density in adolescents, right? This study actually compared two groups of adolescent athletes, one practicing, wushu, again, form of Chinese martial art, and the other practicing, I believe, wrestling, right? Which is like very interesting. Wrestling, and they compared the bone density of the two. Researchers found that both groups had a higher bone mineral density compared to another control group of regular average people. But the wushu group, right, the basic kung fu group, had significantly higher bone mineral density in the femur, right, in the legs, indicating that jumping and landing in these movements that they do in wushu may be particularly beneficial for bone density. So again, even like if you've seen Maasai jumps, and we're gonna get into that as well, right? If you've seen Maasai jumps, right, which are just jumping up and down, right, can increase your bone density if you do it, over a long period enough of a time, right? It's very interesting. Now we're gonna actually dive into the part outside of martial arts. We're gonna dive into other sports as well. Like for example, tennis. I think is a very good one to look at, and it's actually very interesting, right? If you look at a lot of tennis players, the hand that they use to swing their rackets, right, will actually be a lot bigger and will be a lot thicker, and the bone density will actually be a lot stronger in that hand. Because again, right, all they're doing is just smacking the ball, right, with full force with their hand, right, multiple times throughout their day, right? And, tennis is a sport that requires a lot of repetitive arm and wrist movements, which can obviously, because of this, it's going to lead to increased bone density and thicker bones in the forearm. So when the arm is subjected to impact and stress, it triggers the body's natural response to adapt and become stronger. This adaptation, obviously known as Wolff's Law, and it's going to basically make the arm so much stronger. Right? Studies have shown that tennis players have significantly thicker bone density in the dominant forearm, right, the one that they swing the racket with. So and they compared it to their non-dominant hand, and they found that the hand that they swing the racket with is 20% has an increased bone density of about 20%. Right, this increased bone density and thickness can help prevent injuries and improve performance by providing greater stability and support for the muscles and tendons. It's very interesting, right? That like just by them, yeah. Unfortunately, with tennis is that they're only using one arm. Obviously, we as martial artists we can use both, right? But it's very interesting to very consider this type of movement, and I'll probably be discussing this in my Patreon more in detail, right? If you haven't already joined. But basically, how we can use something similar to what tennis players do to increase our bone density in our hands, right? It's actually something that I've been working on, right? And it's gonna be in my Patreon, link below, right? And you know, what's actually very interesting is that um, the grip and the swing to hit a tennis ball puts a significant amount of stress on the bones themselves, which triggers the body's natural healing response, something called osteoblasts, right, which are bone building cells, right? And they're stimulated to deposit new bone tissues in the affected area, making the bones thicker and stronger over time, right? And a tennis player's like forearm bone for their racket swinging hand is actually 20% wider and contains 40% more bone mineral than the other hand. Imagine swinging a tennis racket that weighs over 300 grams and swinging it against a 60-gram tennis ball. Like, imagine that. Like, doing that every single day for years on end. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna definitely help, man. It's definitely gonna help. Now we're gonna move on to another sport, sprinting. Right, this is something we can all do, right, easily, and anyone can do sprinting. Right. What's actually very interesting is that runners who do sprinting have up to a third more bone in their shin bone than people who don't exercise. Sprinters had greater hip and spine bone density than endurance athletes and controls, whereas values were similar in the latter two groups. Right. Sprinters basically had, again, greater hip and spine bone density, just like we mentioned earlier. So sprinting can actually increase the bone density in your hips and even of your spine. Very interesting indeed. Very interesting. Yeah. Give me a second. I'm just gonna. The sun is just shining. I'm gonna honestly just turn on the lights because yeah, yeah. Just got tired of dealing with that. It's fine though. Yeah, like I was saying, sprint runners often have thicker and stronger shin bones than people than, of course, average people, but even athletes in other sports, right? Very interesting, right? And of course, this is all due to Wolff's Law, right? When sprint runners obviously repeatedly pound their feet into the ground, with each stride, the impact creates a stress on the shin bone. And in response to the stress, the bones remodel and become stronger, thicker, and more resistant overall. And obviously, this is going to make them more resistant to fractures, right? This process is actually known as bone remodeling, right? Or bone modeling, right? This is how the bones adapt to demands placed upon it through physical activity, right? All right. Right, there was actually, believe it or not, one study that found that male sprinters had significantly greater bone density in their tibias than soccer players, weightlifters, and again, average people. Right, so even weightlifters, they had higher bone density than, right? That's got to say something, right? So maybe, like, honestly, I'm like being reminded of this myself, and I'm like, man, I gotta start sprinting even more now, right? Another study found that, female sprinters had higher bone density in their tibias compared to endurance runners and again average people, right? So even endurance people, right, even though they're technically running, it's still not as great increase in their bone density compared to sprinters. Right? Honestly, personally, I just loved sprinting. Even like when I was younger, yeah, it was my favorite thing to do. And I'm just gonna start doing it a lot more now that I'm being reminded of this. Right? And like I said, they had greater hip and bone density than endurance athletes and other and other like average people. Right? And you may be asking, why is this the case? Obviously, this is because the high impact forces generate. It basically generates during the sprinting, right? And all that impact on the bones remodels the bones in a process where the bone tissue is broken down and reformed, right? And what's actually interesting is that running is said to have the best effect, as this is exercise, as this exercise is the easiest to access for the majority of the population. Right? Literally, you don't need to do anything crazy for sprinting. Just run. Right? Literally. This works out your muscles the most, right? Making it highly effective to increase overall bone density. Right? And they've done scans on this, believe it or not. Right? Um, and in the bone density scans, they found that 10 and 14% greater bone density than that of endurance runners, right? And of course, average people. Sprinter spine bone density was also greater than both of those people, was endurance runners and average people, right? Right. Now, regular running is also associated with greater bone density at the fracture-prone hip, right? And of course of the spine as well, right? But they did not really notice much of a difference with endurance runners. Again, the endurance is still probably better, but when it comes to bone density specifically, it's not the case. These benefits cannot be explained by indicators, right? I mean, my bad. I was misreading. Study examined the relationship between the foot bone, right? So now we're going to be talking about the foot bone, right? Like I told you guys, I'm going to give you all the sauce, right? And sprint performance in sprinters, right? They took foot images, right, of 56 male sprinters, right? Oh, like these X-ray images, right? And they basically found that the forefoot bones of the big and second toe, which were calculated, right, basically were actually significantly bigger, right? And the lengths, of course, were obviously bigger, right? And furthermore, right, they found that the heel of these athletes was obviously a lot bigger, and the bone density was, of course, a lot greater. These findings actually suggest that, uh, you know, calcaneus, it basically kind of like by the heel, right? May be a key morphological factor for achieving superior sprint performance, potentially via modeling the longer forefoot and rear foot bones and functional foot morphology in sprinters. Basically, that means in plain English. Basically, what that means in plain English is that bone density is going to increase from sprinting, right, and even the football. But I will give you a tip. I will say this right now, and that is when you do sprinting, right? And this is like from personal experience. I personally don't have like a study to back this up. I'm just telling you from personal experience, but I believe it honestly is a fact. That is, if you ideally you should be doing sprints barefoot. Yeah, you should be doing sprints barefoot on a place that has clean grass, of course, right? Or sand, or like some kind of natural terrain. Ideally barefoot. If for whatever reason you can't do it barefoot, shoes is fine, right? But whatever you do, in my honest opinion, I don't think you should be sprinting, and especially like high impact running on a regular like sidewalk concrete, right? Because I've done it personally, and I would say I have pretty healthy knees and like just overall just healthy in general. But I noticed when I started doing it, like I would get like pain in my knee, which is like weird because I never get that whenever I would do barefoot grounding and I would sprint in my yard. right? So that basically showed me that, well, it gave me an epiphany moment that, oh yeah, like basically, people have issues because they're running on concrete. It's the concrete that's messing it up. And again, even the shoes, I think, because if you have very narrow shoes, this is another side point. Get better shoes, right? Right. Get better shoes that aren't going to constrict your foot. That's also another thing. Get better shoes, right? So run barefoot in grass or a natural surface like sand or whatever, right? And don't run on concrete or like a very hard like surface, especially like concrete or sidewalks. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's a tip I will give you guys, right? And they also found, now we'll be moving on to another sport, soccer, right? They did a study that found that soccer and gymnasts sport groups were found to have higher bone density in most of their body segments than groups with like basically average people, right? Okay, right. Now we're gonna be talking about gymnastics. Right? Gymnastics should not be surprising, as obviously they're doing flips and stuff, right? And they're doing crazy athletic movements. Right? Gymnasts had a higher bone density. And what's actually interesting is that swimmers and cyclists were lowest amongst the athletes to have a bone density, right? Another difference probably is because the result of the weight that is put on the bone during these sport activities. Also, a sudden push or force on the bones is more important than a gradual increase in weight. So, for example, a gymnast dismounts. The bones get a real jolt about 5 times the gymnast's weight, right? Which is actually insane. All the athletes with high bone density do lots of jumping. So again, like I was talking about my side jumps. Do a lot of jumping, do a lot of sprinting. And honestly, again, this is a reminder for myself just as much as it is for probably you as well. Yeah, like we should honestly be doing more sprints and like jumping in general. Just a reminder for myself just as much as it is for you. Yeah, yeah. Studies show that, and again, we're going to be coming back to martial arts, right? So with martial arts, again, they found another study found that martial artists had significantly higher bone density in their hands, their arms, and legs compared to, again, average people, right? The study was actually composed of 138 people, right? So 48 martial artists and 90 non, like average people, basically, right? And it included people of both genders, right? With the average age of, I guess, basically 12 to 13 years old, right? And bone density was measured, right, using x-rays, of course, in like these various parts of the body. And they basically found that weekly training and load previous, yeah, right, during the engagement in these sports reported basically way more bone density, right? And of course muscle mass as well, right? So yeah, I mean that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, right? And they also did you know another study with martial artists, right? Specifically with Taekwondo, right? They found that they had a higher bone density in the lumbar spine and the neck and the overall actual body of these Taekwondo practitioners. Another study again found that, people who did karate had positive effects on bone density as well, even for post-menopausal women, right? Which again, very interesting indeed. Right, and then they did another study on this is actually specifically with grappling, right? And they found that again there was more bone density, a positive effect on bone density, even in menopausal women. I don't know why they're doing it, but yeah, that's what they did, right? So I just pulled up like every stat that I could find on bone density with martial arts, sports, and whatnot, right? And another study found that wrestlers had significantly greater bone density than non-wrestlers, right? Overall, the effects of bone density is pretty strong on this, honestly, right? And that is there is very good evidence that training in Taekwondo, karate, grappling, or wrestling, Wing Chun, right, have positive effects on bone health, right? A study published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Metabolism in 2008 found that, again, with grappling, they found higher bone density in the lumbar spine compared to average people. A study found that male wrestlers had higher bone mineral density in the femoral neck, in the lumbar spine compared to control groups. Again, this should not be surprising to anyone, right? Considering in wrestling, there's always hand fighting, right? And trying to snap the neck, right? So your neck is obviously going to become very resistant to that, right? Especially on top of that, if you're training your neck too. Because another side point, train your neck, of course, right? Study published found that, again, Taekwondo athletes had a higher bone density in the spine and in the hips compared to average people, right? So, they found that, you know, again, if we just keep repeating it, right? They found that, basically with all these martial artists, that your bone density is going to increase, right? And that should not be a surprise, right? Because even with MMA fighters, right? They found that MMA fighters and football players actually had higher bone mineral density, right? So obviously, of course, even football and MMA producing very high mineral bone density, right? So like I was saying that, yeah, like bone density is going to help a lot. And we're going to be discussing different body parts and like how you can basically use, to grow different parts of the body, like the bones specifically in your body, whether it's the jaw, the arms, the legs, right? We're going to go into detail with that, right? Right, believe it or not, Wolf's Law can actually be applied to the jawbone, right? Right, right. So if the jaw is subjected to constant stress and strain, such as in the case of eating regular tough foods, like for example meat, right, and other tough foods as well, right, it may lead to the strengthening and the thickening of the jawbone over time, right, right. There are various things you can kind of do to help stimulate the bone. Now, of course, there's the mandible bone, that is the lower jawbone, and then there's, of course, the upper jawbone, right? And what's actually very interesting is that jaw clenching, right? This can involve clenching your teeth together for several seconds at a time, then releasing, and you can repeat this exercise several times a day. Right now, personally, I would not personally grind on my teeth really hard, so you might want to put something in between your teeth. Right? I believe the jaws sizer, right? And that can help. Right? Obviously, just don't overdo it, right? You know, and resistance training, placing your hand against your chin and applying gentle resistance, right? So, right, I know it looks goofy, right? It works, right? And you can do exercise several times in a day, right? Right? And chewing, of course you can chew gum as well, right? But I would recommend not chewing, the gums that are sold in the store, right? Either get like really good like mastic gum, right? Mastic gum is pretty, relatively cheap for the price. Or you can get like this other gum that I've seen. Again, it's gonna be mentioned in my Patreon. I'm not sponsored by them, right? That like, granted, it is a bit pricey, but if you do like chewing a lot gum, it's probably worth it in my honest opinion. Especially if this is something you really want to focus on. You should get that type of gum, and it's gonna help develop that jaw, right? And it doesn't have any, processed food, like processed chemicals in there, right? It's gonna be all natural, right? And of course, you can do tongue exercises, like for example, mewing, right? Which is where you just put your tongue to the roof of the mouth, right? And you make sure that like this part right here just goes up, right? Pushing the tongue against the roof of the mouth and behind the teeth, and it's gonna help stimulate the jawbone, right? And that's actually how you're supposed to be. Now again, I know this isn't a diet maxing video. I recommend you watching the max, but I will go over a little bit of stuff, right? And that is goat milk, right? Especially raw goat milk, helps grow your mandible, your lower jaw, right? They actually, and of course, even citrus fruits, right? So what's actually very interesting is that drinking goat milk or sheep milk and citrus fruits um, has something in it called inositol, right, which is a form of a sugar that can be found in it, and this sugar has been suggested to actually increase the length of the mandible, right? It's very interesting, right? And they even found something called the royal jelly, right? It actually assists with the development of the upper jaw, right? So depending on which jaw you guys want to increase, right? I'm telling you again, all the sauce that's available, right? Royal jelly actually helps with the upper jaw, which obviously leads to a more better facial bone structure, right? Right, and royal jelly, believe it or not, can actually gives you better mewing results, right? And if you know anything about mewing, which is what I just explained, right, is that it helps with gaining a wider maxilla, right? But royal jelly helps it even more, which allows you to breathe through your nose more easily, fit your tongue better, and eventually, you know, um, creep in your PSNS dominant state, right? Right. It's actually very interesting because it develops to basically having a better face overall, right? How does it do this? It works with something called chondrocyte, right? Which is basically the thing that differentiates the mid-palatal suture, right? This is where the maxilla grows in width, right? Wider, right? And royal jelly actually stimulates the growth by enhancing this thing called chondrocyte, right? A process where new cartilage is actually created. This cartilage eventually turns into bone, which eventually results in you having a wider maxilla, right? Right. I know it's a lot of, yeah, sciencey stuff, but hopefully that makes sense. Basically, it's going to help increase the upper jaw, right? Royal jelly for the upper jaw, goat, sheep milk, citrus fruits for the lower jaw, right? And yeah, right. Now we're going to be talking about the hands, right? The hands of a tennis professional, right? They've actually done, you know, X-ray images, right? Maybe I'll post it up on here, right? You guys will probably see it, hopefully, right? And that is, they found that, like if you look at the right hand of this tennis player's X-ray, his hand is so much bigger compared to his left, right? Right, right, like it's actually so much bigger, right? Like, because he uses the right hand to just swing and swing and swing over years on end. And that hand literally became bigger just because of that, right? Like it's actually a crazy difference. So his hand would be like a lot bigger, right? And they actually found, again, with this tennis player, that increasing the bone density increased the cortical thickness in the arm, in the racket swinging arm, compared to his other arm, right? And they've done like specific, like this many inches and that many inches, right? And this many millimeters and this many millimeters, right? It's actually a very, significant difference, honestly. Like, it's actually crazy. Maybe, like, I've been actually working on something to help develop, and it's actually going to be in my Patreon. It probably already is out now, by now, right? But basically, how we can use something similar to what tennis players do to increase bone density, right? In our hands and our arms, right? Right? And if we look specifically at the knuckles, right? Knuckles that you punch with, right? Yeah. We look at the knuckles that we punch with, right? Like a lot of you might have seen, like again, like I was mentioning with the uh, karate practitioners, they use something called the Makiwara board, and Muay Thai, the heavy bag, boxing punching bag, right? to toughen the bones, of course, and the knuckles, right? And of course, it's going to toughen the skin even, right? Because it's going to help you withstand impact better, right? Right. There are these Makiwara boards, which again you can get. Right, it's like a wooden board, right? And you just punch it repeatedly. Like you probably have seen Jiri Prohaska doing this, right? And it increases the bone density, right? It makes your bones thicker and more resistant, and even the skin itself, actually, right? Wosla can help explain the effects of knuckle conditioning on bone density, right? So the law, of course, we probably don't need to go over this, right? But over time, this process will lead to increased bone density in knuckles. I don't know if you guys can hopefully see, right? Right? But if you see just even my knuckles, right? I don't personally, I didn't use a Makiwara board personally, right? I probably should though. I probably will order one actually very soon. But right, I mean I've technically used it like at other places. I just don't have one myself, right? But even before that, I would just use like a flat surface, like a wall, or just a flat surface, and just knock my knuckles on there. Just like not like crazy hard, just right. Just do that with both your hands, right? And just tap it, just tap it, and over time, you will actually notice your knuckles will actually become way more dense, right? It's something that honestly a lot of you should start doing, right? Especially if you don't want to injure your hand, right? And making your knuckles stronger, right? Right. And they've actually done a study on this actually. They found that that the hands and the wrists that were thicker and denser in martial arts compared to again average people suggested that repetitive impacts of training may lead to bone adaptation. And another study investigated the effects of punching a heavy bag on the hands and the wrist of boxers. The research found that the boxers had thicker skin and greater bone mineral content in their hands compared to, again, average people, indicating that their training may have led to adaptation in the tissue of their hands and their wrists. It's very interesting, honestly, like how stuff like this can just increase your bone density, right? Which I believe is honestly one of the most important factors, especially with martial arts and MMA, right? If your bones are stronger than who you're fighting, it'll be a lot easier for you to beat them, right? And they've actually done. I did forget to mention this earlier, right? With the tennis player, right? The forearm of the tennis player that he swings the racket with is actually a lot larger as well, right? Significantly larger. I'll post the X-ray hopefully up as you guys can see, right? But yeah, for right now, I'm just gonna pause right here and come back because yeah. So yeah, now that I'm back, I mean, I just had to take off my sweater because it was like basically cooking me. But yeah, the next thing that we're gonna talk about is we're talking about different parts of the body. So we're gonna be talking about the knee now, the patella. Right, there are some studies that do suggest that like when you exercise, right, your knee and your patella specifically can actually grow, right, a lot stronger, right? And what they found is that really is high impact exercise, like for example, jumping, right? Plyometrics, right? Right, these types of exercises can really increase the bone mineral density in the knee joint, right? And they actually did a study by the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, and they found that a 12-week resistance training program improved the bone mineral density in the femur and the tibia, which are the long bones in the thigh and the lower leg, right? They also found that in another study that it was published by the Journal of Orthopediatric Research, and that what they basically did in the study is that they looked at like long-term physical activity on the patella bone and density in 80 healthy males and female volunteers. Right, and in this research, they found that the bone mineral in the patella density was significantly increased. Right, and compared to like people that just lived were just like a sedentary group, right? That basically just did nothing, right? And right, it was actually very interesting because a lot of people have weak knees, they have problematic knees, right? But if you just dedicate a little bit of time to your knee, right? And again, I do go over this very well, rigorously in my program, right, biohacking for MMA. Right, I really recommend you guys check that out. Right, about like how you can actually increase bone density within different parts of the body. Obviously, I'm discussing this here, right? And they also did another study, right? And it was a 12-week exercise program on the patella bone density, right, in 30 uh, females, right? And they found that the pain that they used to have, right, the specific people that they chose were 30 females that had patellofemoral pain syndrome, right? Right, which is basically just exclusive like knee pain, right? And they found that the exercise program consisted of strengthening and balance, and the program actually led to significant increase in the patella bone density, right? And then on top of that, another study, right? They found that sufficient calcium and vitamin D intake can also increase bone density and health. Obviously, not too surprising, right? And then they did a pretty recent study. It was 2020, right, from the Journal of Osteoporosis and Sarcopenia, where they found that higher levels of physical activity were associated with greater knee bone density in men and women. So basically, point is, if you want to increase bone density, just overall in your body, but specifically in the knee especially, start working out. It's that simple. Start working out, right? Right. And if you're like you don't know what kind of workouts, right? Like you're kind of confused on this, right? Because I won't spend too much time on workout maxing here. Right. I do have another video on that, but if you want more detailed help, I recommend you joining the biohacking from MMA program. That is a lot more detailed, and I basically give you all that, right? And the first few people, obviously, that join, they do get more direct help from me myself, right? Right. Now we're going to be moving on to the shins, right? This is probably what a lot of you are here for, right? Because this is probably the most popular one when you consider like, Muay Thai and all this, right? And they found that the shin briefly becomes a millimeter shorter as your foot hits the ground when running. And sprint runners have up to a third more of their bone in their shin bone than people who don't exercise. So people who don't sprint and do all this stuff. This is why also Maasai jumps, right? If you look at those African tribes that do a jump, there's basically jumping real high. And that could definitely help you, right? And all right, they found that these small changes, right, like sprinting, for example, in the month starting exercise, it actually reduces the chance of breaking your foot or your shin bone, right? And when a triple jumper's heel basically hits the ground, right, the force is 15 times greater than your body weight, which is actually crazy, right? Right, which is almost the weight of like a small car. In fact, because muscles normally attach close to the joints, muscular forces are even greater than these impact forces. So so basically the example that they gave is that in the same way you had to push harder to lift someone on a seesaw, closer you get to the middle, right? So basically a seesaw, if you guys have ever seen one or been on one, right? There's a certain length, right? So the closer you get to it, right? Uh, my bad. Oh yeah. So the closer you get to it, right? The slightly easier it becomes, I believe. Or no, my bad. It's the other way around. Slightly further you are, the easier it kind of becomes, right? If the seesaw is strong, obviously, right? So another thing that so since we talked about the shin bone, we're going to be talking about, you know, basically the feet, right? Because a lot of people also have like really messy like feet, right? And I won't dive too deep into like flat foot and all that stuff. Maybe that might be a separate video that I'll do, but the feet are basically just very important, right? And what's actually very interesting that I've seen like a lot of karate people and taekwondo people, right? Especially like the old school people, right? They do foot conditioning, right? They do a lot of foot conditioning, which is probably why like um like if you have ever kicked someone in the head like with like the foot, right? And like let's be honest here, like kicking with the foot, like you should be doing that, right? Like it's MMA, right? Like, and also, like, even no matter how hard you try to kick with your shin bone, like, eventually you're going to kick with your foot. Eventually it's going to happen, right? So you want to make sure that your foot is conditioned, right? And a lot of these karate people I've seen is, they'll take, like, kind of like a conditioning bag, right? Honestly, you could do this just on a regular punching bag and just lay it across and just kick. Just not too hard, but just build up the bone condense, right? And then you add up the force, and then you add it up, right? Well, basically, what I've seen is that these karate people, I don't remember the exact name of it, unfortunately, but I do remember putting it in the program, right? And that is, it's like this hard in the back that they do, and they kick it, right? And they'll even do karate chops on it. They'll lightly punch it, right? They'll basically do forearm strikes on it and foot strikes, right? Basically, this conditioning bag that they have. It's slightly harder than an actual punching bag, so obviously be careful with it. And over time, this would develop the bone conditioning in their feet, right? And like we were talking about sprinting earlier, and what's interesting is that when you compare like people who do sprinting, right, and their foot bone like density, basically, right, sprinters were divided into faster and slower groups, right, and this is actually a very interesting study because they were doing it between sprinters and between people who just basically just I'm guessing it's marathon runners, right, and the relative lengths and heights in the foot bone are calculated, right, when they did that they found that the second toe and the big toe, right, between faster and slower sprinters were actually of different lengths, right? Right. That's actually very interesting, right? Right. And then like we're obviously talking about, you know, fast for the faster sprinters actually had a bigger toe, bigger second toe, right? And we'll be talking about other parts of the body. They actually had a bigger, something called a talus, right? That was also bigger, and a calcaneus, which was also bigger, right? It's very interesting, right? Right. And what the calcaneus is, right? Is basically just the heel bone, or yeah, the heel, basically, right? The bone of the heel, right? Right. And obviously, like if you do taekwondo, you've done karate, right? Like there's so many kicks that you can do with the heel bone, right? Like you can just right, like hook kicks, spinning hook kicks to the body, hook kick to the leg, right? There's a bunch of techniques, right? And honestly, like if you just land that hook kick, like just the heel kick, that's also another one. Crescent kicks, right? Yeah, like if you just land that on someone's chin, like, and if you just land it right, yeah, they're pretty much going out. So conditioning that part is also very important, right? And we obviously see like with sprinters, right, especially fast-paced sprinters, they have higher bone density in the foot overall, and the calcaneus also as well, right? It's actually very interesting, right? So now you might be asking, like, what is like, I guess, the science behind it? Right? What does that exactly do? So when you increase the activity of something called the osteoblasts, and what that is basically just the bone forming cells, right? And it can make your bones stronger, right? Osteoblasts are responsible for laying down new bone tissue. They play a crucial role in like maintenance and repair of the bone tissues. So when you increase this, right, your bone basically become stronger and denser, right? Which can obviously help prevent things like fractures and other bone injuries, right? Some ways to increase osteoblast activity, obviously, like I've said throughout this video, is resistance training, exercising, and consuming a good amount of calcium and vitamin D, right? And specifically getting vitamin D from the sun. That's probably really helpful, right? Right. And obviously, I won't give you every super specific exercises, but things like weight bearing exercises, like really do help, right? So things like running, sprinting, right? Jumping, resistance training, right? And all these things basically promote bone growth, right? Right. And another thing that I believe is like super underrated is consuming collagen. Right, collagen is a protein that provides a structural framework for bones. Right, ideally you get this collagen either from I've seen two types. So there's like grass-fed collagen, right, or there's marine collagen, which is like from seafood. Either way, right, it's pretty good. And right, you should get collagen if you can. And you can get collagen like powder, which is pretty good, or you could get it from collagen-rich foods like bone broth, like taking collagen supplements, right? Right, like for example, like collagen powder. I always recommend powders because they absorb into your body a lot better, right? And they'll stimulate the osteoblasts, right, the bone forming cells. And of course, I mentioned this in my sleep maxing video. Get a good amount of sleep. Because sleep is important for bone health and will help stimulate that osteoblast activity, right? And this shouldn't even be like I shouldn't even have to tell you this, right? But if you're like a subhuman, like maybe you need to hear this, is that you should avoid smoking and drinking alcohol. Like, both of these habits decrease bone density, right? And will inhibit osteoblasts, right? So stop that shit. Right? Stop, like just stop all degenerate habits you got. Like you know, I do have like, you know, I do have a part in the program where I do talk about how you can give up these things, right? And why you should give up these things, right? So, click the link in the bio below. Biohacking for a minute. Highly recommend it, right? And I do want to mention, like, obviously, like nothing I'm saying is like this isn't going to be quick. Like bone, you know, your bone density increasing is not going to be a quick process. It's going to take some time. So keep that in mind, right? Keep that in mind, right? There are some human examples I can give you, right? Like for example, I think this is a pretty good example, right? And that is like with humans when they exercise and you know what I mean, it can increase their bone mineral density, like by like you know, depending on what type of exercise they do, by 5.4%, all the way up to 64%, right? And even you know, but I'll give you some examples of some people, right? And maybe even historical examples, or like people that have good bone density, right? I think the most famous example is Yo Romero, right? Right, yeah. Yo Romero is a very good example. Like everyone that's fought him has said that fighting him basically feels like I'm kicking steel, right? And that just because his bone density is just so much stronger than like probably the average fighter, right? And I remember I saw this one video of this one guy he fought, and like the I believe the part where he like kneed the guy, like you can still kind of see the dent there, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? So if you want to increase your bone density, right? Yeah, MVP also, right? MVP also had like a fight. I believe it was against Cyborg, where like he basically kneed the guy and like it actually broke the guy's skull, which is insane considering how strong skull is. Like you never see that, right? Like never see someone like breaking a skull. I understand the jaw, but the skull itself broke, which is insane, right? So, you may be asking, why does Yo Romero have this? Now, there might be a bunch of reasons why, right? I won't get into the reasons of, like things that you can't per se control, right? But I guarantee you, he's been doing a lot of sprinting. Like, I've seen those videos of him sprinting, right? He's been doing a lot of jumping, I'm sure, as well, right? A lifetime of just martial arts training, right? Wrestling training, explosive training, physical strength training, right? And MMA training, of course, right? Of course, all these things are going to add up and make your bone density stronger, right? And I guarantee you he's getting good amounts of sleep. He's doing a bunch of great stuff, right? For the most part, right? And that's gonna basically help with the activation of the osteoblast and the bone remodeling, right? And of course, from what I know is, yeah, I believe he was from Cuba, right? And he probably had a way better diet than the American diet, right? Because America is just filled with processed foods and whatnot. So, right, he probably had a more natural diet, a way better like natural diet. So that is also another thing as well, right? Right, and a lot of Muay Thai fighters, right? Like I mean, I guess Bukau was also a pretty good example, right? Like if you look at his training, like a lot of just kicking the pads, kicking the pads, kicking the pads. Honestly, that stuff, like kicking, punching, all this stuff, obviously with proper form and everything, you're naturally going to increase your bone density, right? Just training in general, in and of itself, and sprinting, I highly recommend. Right, sprinting is probably one of the best. Jumping, right, one of the best that you can do. Right, all this stuff will help you increase your bone density. Right, Bukau, like he's a famous Muay Thai fighter. If you don't know who that is, like, shame on you if you don't. Right, but him and then MVP, like I mentioned, with MVP, unfortunately, I haven't looked into his specific training routine too much, but I do know he comes from like a more traditional like background, like a karate taekwondo background, one of those two. And of course, they have a lot of bone conditioning as well. Right, those old school martial arts do have bone conditioning, right, in their curriculum, right. So I think is very important, right. Yeah, very important, right. And I'll now what I'm going to do is I'll give you some historical examples, which I think is very fascinating, right. So a lot of you might not know this, but if you've heard of the Ottomans, right, the Ottoman Empire in specific, right, the Turks, right, there's something called the Ottoman slap, right. I know it sounds funny, but it's actually true. The Ottoman slap, right. Some even call it the Turkish slap or the Sultan slap, right. But this is actually something that was popularized in the Ottoman Empire, and right, believe it or not, this move would literally involve open palm, just slapping someone, right? And the reason that they actually did this was, especially in combat, is like if you tried, it's like yeah, I'm wearing an armor, right, made out of metal on my head, right, a helmet, right. You punching that, you're probably gonna break your hand, right, more than likely. But open hand, and you just slap it, you slap them, you actually like might because of the way of the shape it is, right, might literally just get knocked out, even though you have that helmet, right? Or it would be enough to like, you know, get you off balance, what I mean? And a lot of these soldiers and whatnot from the Ottoman Empire would actually practice something called as a marble slap, right? So they would have marble tiles, and literally they would just slap their hand, slap their hand, slap their hand, slap their hand, and over time, obviously this increased the bone density in their hand, and yeah. And this is actually something I remember discovering like a while back. And it's honestly so insane that we have like basically this example right here that like, you know, just literally slapping. Now, if you don't have like a marble tile, if you have like a kitchen countertop made out of like a tile, that could work potentially as well, right? You can probably get marble tiles or you can get like some kind of like hard surface, like even wood, if it's like smoothened out, and just, slapping it, that will also help. Obviously, start off slow and then build up the resistance to it, right? But what's actually very interesting is that, so what is, the Ottoman slap also became, it's a very long history, but, I'll give it to you guys. You know what? Why not? Right. I think it's actually kind of interesting that we should go over like how ancient people did do certain things, especially with this pretty good example of bone conditioning, right? So now let me exactly see. So if we look at even like pre-Ottoman warriors, like for example the Seljuk Empire, right, which was a precursor to the Ottoman Empire, and yeah, the Seljuks were also another force, to be reckoned with, right? And their expansion into Anatolia, right? Right? This slapping technique, right, became popular among their soldiers, right? And they had a way better diet than most people and a long training period, which obviously included hitting marble and wooden blocks for different types of impact, right? And within their target point, what they would basically aim for is mostly the ear, the nose, or the back of the neck, right? Especially whenever they would be on land or on naval battles, right? And using a slap instead of a punch was obviously way more practical, considering rather considerations. Because again, it's just a ball on force, right? And like, even if you probably slapped a wall really hard, you would probably not break your hand. But if even a slight punch in the wrong, way will break your hand. So again, yeah, it was deployed, right, by these Seljuk, the Empire, and of course the Ottoman Empire, right? And when we look into like how Wolf's Law can apply to a historical context like this, right? Obviously, repeated like blows to like marble or wooden blocks, right? Right. We even see this with like Chinese people, right? And as we go on, right, where they literally just let their hand drop back, forward, right? All this stuff, right? And that will increase the bone density of your hand, right? Because again, it adds some stress into it, right? It helps build up the osteoporosis, right? All right. And this would actually be very beneficial for MMA fighters because the likelihood of injuring your hand and your wrist would go, significantly down, right? So, yeah, maybe it is something you should consider, regardless of, you know, how funny it may seem, right? Now, another one is Chinese iron palm training, right? Yes. Hmm. Right, like we see, let me just pull it up real quick. Great. So what's interesting about Chinese iron palm training is what they would do is they would have a bag filled with gravel, right? And again, this would either be used with like punching, right, hand strikes of some kind, or even like other parts of the body, right? But primarily, I believe it was used mostly for hands, right? And this is something that we also use in some schools of karate as well, and even maybe some Muay Thai fighters I have heard have started picking up on this as well. Right, right. But similar to the Ottoman slap, but this was specifically on a bag, a gravel shaped bag, and that is what they would use for conditioning. Right. So maybe it is something that is worth investing into. Right. We're going to be talking about like what kind of gear you can get for increasing your bone density. Right. And what they specifically would do is like they would again like the Ottomans slap your whole palm, throw or even throwing the back of their hand, cutting the side of the hand, and dotting the fingertips as well. And even sometimes going the other way. This is also I forgot the exact reverse knife hand strike, I believe is what it's called. At least that's what I believe we called it in Taekwondo. Right. And they would like condition this part as well. Right. Which is very interesting because no one conditions this, right? And then stamping the base of the palm. So like right here. Right. Yeah. And yeah, this whole thing is like really interesting. Like how you have people in the ancient past doing this type of stuff. Right. Now, there's also something called makiwara. And a makiwara is it's actually comes from Japan, specifically from the karate people. Right. Any karate practitioners, karate people, karate practitioners, right? karate people. I swear. Anyways, Makiwara is a training tool that was used in various striking martial arts, like karate, for example, right? And the purpose of training with the Makiwara is to develop and refine the striking techniques and improve power and accuracy. So if you probably order this online if you want. The Makiwara was simply just like a board, right? And it actually in Japanese it translates to wrapped straw or rolled straw. And traditionally, the makiwara was constructed as a wooden base strap and like a rope around it, or like straw roped, basically just rope around it, providing a firm enough surface that you could strike on. Now, some makiwara boards might have padding or a foam cover to reduce the impact and protect the hands, but I personally think you should use the more old school one, right? Obviously, with proper technique and you know, yeah, like with proper technique and all that, with proper technique and everything, right? You should be using that. So that way you don't, and we obviously be mindful of what you use, how much force you actually implement into it, right? Now, the standing makiwara, that's like the most traditional form of it. That is what you should get, right? And then it's just a flat board. Honestly, just type in makiwara, 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 right? And that will be good enough. Just get that. Honestly, there's also something called a naha makiwara, which is also a flat board, but it is used by is it is usually supposed to be as high as like in instructors like your solar plexus, right? And the makiwara traditionally was used by people in a deep stance, so, right. There's also something called a ude makiwara, right? And the ude makiwara is slightly different because it's round on all sides. This allows the practitioner to use a variety of strikes and kicks on the makiwara, which could not be used on flat boards. I have not really seen people throw kicks, so this is a slightly different makiwara. So I'm just giving you these slight variations of the makiwara. Right? There's also the handheld makiwara, which is like a portable version, right? Right. And yeah, this like you can kind of take with you, right, wherever you go, right? And usually it's held with one hand and struck with the other, right? And makiwara, yeah. But yeah, these are some of the variations. It's probably something worth investing into, right? Or you could just build it yourself. I've seen some people do that as well. Just taking a flat piece of wood, long wood, and just tying a rope around it. That also can work, right? It's really up to you what you want to do, right? At the end of the day, right? Right. That is 100% up to you. Now, I know board breaking is also pretty popular within, and a lot of people, you know, they knock it off and they're like they kind of quote Bruce Lee, but you do have to understand why Bruce Lee was criticizing board breaking, right? And the main reason he was criticizing it because that's what mostly all people would do. They wouldn't actually do actual combat, if that makes sense. Like they would do board breaking, and it's pretty impressive, right? But would they be able to land that punch in an actual fight? That is more so Bruce Lee. The funny thing is, he did do board breaking as well. Like if you look at some of the footage of Bruce Lee out there, basically what his emphasis was is that don't only focus on that, right? But for the sake of this video, we're focusing on it, right? Obviously, it shouldn't be like the only thing you do for martial arts training, right? But board breaking, I do think holds value because, again, I think it's a good way to test how strong your bones are, right? And also, like, you need really good technique to pull it off, especially if like you're doing it with a good amount of boards, right? Obviously, take it slow and whatnot. But one board and then two board and then three board, right? And see like how hard you can go, how fast. Obviously, again, try not to injure yourself, right? That is also another thing. And there's a lot of board breaking and makiwara, like I said, there's a lot of different equipments, marble tiles and wooden tiles and granite tiles, right, that you can do to increase your bone density. But another thing that I recently ordered that I just have laying around here that I remember. So Wing Chun ring right here, right, this thing right here. Well, I don't think this will necessarily increase your bone density too much, but if you just strike this, right, just repeatedly, just keep striking this over and over again, right, I think that will also help. But the way to use this, right, I mean, I'll try not to break anything, but basically, you're supposed to strike, right. But the point is that, things like that are made out of hard substance, like this is made out of metal. The more traditional ones are made out of wood, but I chose this one because metal is stronger than wood, right? But yeah, I mean, things like this can honestly help, right? Even like, again, people will knock it on it, but a Wing Chun dummy, right? Hitting a Wing Chun dummy, right, repeatedly over time, that will increase your bone density, right? Like, how many people actually hit wood? Pause. But you get my point. How many people actually do it? Not many, right? Right. Like, imagine the bone conditioning, because when you throw elbow strikes against wood, this is also good form right here, right? Yeah, good way to increase your bone density overall, right? Granted, I know Wing Chun dummy can probably be slightly expensive, so you don't need to necessarily get that. But the point is, think about ways you can condition. Right? This is honestly mostly a conscious thing that you're gonna have to think about, and it doesn't have to be super like, how do I say this? It doesn't have to be super like, you know professionalized and whatnot. Like, you need to get like this equipment per se, because you could do this on just a hard surface. The When I started doing like knuckle conditioning, literally I would just go on like a flat surface and just like hit just the back of my hand. Right, it's like, this is not a smooth surface, but just hitting it slight, short force, small amount of force, right? And over time that will condition your bones and overall everything else, right? But yeah, I mean, hopefully you know, this has been helpful for you, right? The bone maxing video, right? Increasing your bone density. And hopefully, if you found this helpful, I highly recommend you subscribe to my channel and like this video. And if you want further help, then you can join the biohacking for MMA program. And that is where you'll get more detailed help, right? That can help you with either this or diet or sleep or whatever, right? And MMA overall, right? So that you can get ahead of the competition. But, until we come back, I will see you in the next video.